I thought my husband was finally changing when he showed up with a homemade breakfast and a smile I hadn't seen in months. But my body warned me something was wrong. I trusted that instinct and handed the meal to his secretary instead. An hour later, her scream echoed through the office, and when the truth surfaced, I understood why he never wanted me to eat it. Before I tell you how that moment exposed a truth meant to bury me alive, pause for a second, support the story, tell me where you're listening from, and stay with me. What followed changed everything. My name is Alara Knox, and at the time I was the Chief Financial Director of Virion Holdings, a glass and steel tower rising over downtown Ravenport. From the outside, my life looked immaculate. Corner office, tailored suits, a powerful husband admired by everyone. Inside, my body was quietly betraying me. I was 12 weeks pregnant. No one knew. Not my colleagues. Not my board. Not even my husband, Marcus Hale, the CEO of the company and the man I had loved for 3 years. The nausea came in brutal waves every morning, sharp enough to steal my breath. Strong smells were the worst. Anything heavy, oily, or animal made my stomach twist violently. That morning, I arrived earlier than usual, hoping the building would still be quiet. Pale sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off spreadsheets stacked neatly on my desk. I had just sat down when my office door opened without a knock. Marcus stepped in. He was carrying a high-end thermal container, slate blue, the kind usually reserved for luxury catering. What startled me wasn't the container, it was his expression. He was smiling, not his usual boardroom smile, not the practice charm he used with investors. This one was intimate, familiar, almost nostalgic. "Good morning, love," he said softly. "Happy anniversary." I froze. Our anniversary had passed weeks ago. Marcus never remembered dates. He barely remembered dinners. "I wanted to do something special," he continued, setting the container gently on my desk. "You've been working too hard. You've lost weight. I cooked for you myself." That alone should have told me something was wrong. Marcus never cooked. He unscrewed the lid, and steam rose instantly. Thick, heavy, carrying a pungent smell that slammed into my senses. My stomach lurched violently. I clenched my jaw, fighting the reflex to gag. Inside was a rich stew, dark meat, heavily spiced, glistening with oil. "Your favorite," he said. "Slow cooked. I cleaned everything myself. Eat while it's hot." If this had happened 6 months earlier, I might have cried from gratitude. But that scent was unbearable. My throat tightened. My vision blurred. "Thank you," I said carefully, forcing a smile. "That's thoughtful. But I already ate at home. I'm still full." His smile faltered just for a second. Then it returned, smoother, tighter. "A little won't hurt," he said. "I didn't wake up before dawn for nothing." There it was. Pressure. Quiet, disguised as care. Before I could respond, there was a knock. Lena Moore, Marcus's new executive assistant, stepped in carrying files. She was young, polished, and dressed to be noticed. Her eyes flicked to Marcus, then to the container. "Oh wow," she said brightly. "The boss cooking? That's rare. Alara, you're so lucky." Marcus didn't look at her. He gave me a final glance and left without another word. The door closed. Silence returned, except for the nausea clawing up my throat. An idea surfaced, calm and instinctive. I slid the container toward Lena. "I really can't eat it. It would be a shame to waste his effort. Have you had breakfast?" Her eyes lit up instantly. "Are you sure?" "Please," I said gently. "He'd hate for it to go cold." She hesitated only long enough to glance down the hall. Then she lifted the container like a prize. "I won't leave a drop." The relief was immediate. I sat back, breathing slowly, hand resting over my stomach, whispering promises to the life inside me. An hour later, everything shattered. A loud crash echoed from the open workspace. Then came a scream, not startled, not frightened. Agony. I ran. Lena was on the floor beside her desk, convulsing. The container lay overturned, its contents splattered across the carpet. Blood was spreading beneath her dress. Too much blood. People shouted. Someone called emergency services. And then Marcus appeared. He didn't rush to her. He stared at the blood. Then he looked at me. And in his eyes I saw something I will never forget. Not shock, not fear. Disappointment. He crossed the distance in seconds and grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "What did you do?" he hissed. "Why wasn't it you?" That was the moment I understood. And that understanding would cost him everything. For a moment after Marcus spoke, the world went eerily quiet. Not silent, sirens were already screaming somewhere far below. People were shouting. Phones were ringing, but inside my head everything froze. "Why wasn't it you?" Those 4 words echoed louder than the chaos around us. I stared at his hand, clamped around my arm. His grip wasn't frantic or confused. It was controlled, furious, like a plan had gone wrong. I wrenched myself free. "What are you saying?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I gave her the food you brought." Marcus's face shifted instantly. The rage vanished, replaced by something smoother, more dangerous. He stepped back as if he'd been shocked by his own reaction and dragged a hand down his face. "Get yourself together," he muttered, loud enough for only me to hear. "You need to come to the hospital. This happened because of that food." Because of the food. Not concern. Not shock. An accusation. Paramedics rushed in, pushing past us with a stretcher. Lena was barely conscious, her skin ashen, lips blue, eyes rolling back as they lifted her. Blood soaked the carpet where she had been lying. Someone gagged from the smell. Someone else started crying. Marcus followed the stretcher, barking orders like a commander retreating from a failed battle. Just before the elevator doors closed, he turned and looked straight at me. That look wasn't a threat. It was a warning. I stood there long after they were gone, my legs shaking so badly I had to lean against my desk. My hand moved instinctively to my stomach. If I had eaten that stew, I couldn't finish the thought. I drove myself to Ravenport General in a fog. The city blurred past my windshield. My mind replayed the morning again and again. Marcus's smile, the insistence, the pressure, the smell, the way his disappointment flashed before he hit it. In the waiting room, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Marcus paced back and forth like a trapped animal, running his hands through his hair, checking his phone, glancing at me with thinly veiled hostility. We didn't speak. When the ER doors finally opened, a doctor stepped out, removing his gloves. Marcus lunged forward. "How is she?" he demanded. "Is she stable?" The doctor's gaze lingered on him longer than necessary before answering. "She's alive, but she suffered acute poisoning. Severe internal bleeding." Poisoning. My knees nearly gave out. "The substance found in her system," the doctor continued carefully, "is a medication used to induce uterine contractions." Marcus went completely still. I felt the air drain from my lungs. "It's commonly used for pregnancy termination," the doctor said. "The dosage she ingested was extremely high. This wasn't accidental." The hallway seemed to tilt. Marcus's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "We've already contacted law enforcement," the doctor added. "This qualifies as intentional poisoning." 2 uniformed officers appeared at the end of the corridor as if summoned by the words. Marcus recovered fast. Too fast. "That's impossible," he said sharply, turning toward them. "This morning, I cooked a meal for my wife. She had sole access to it before giving it to my assistant. I believe my wife added something out of jealousy." Jealousy. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt something inside me snap cleanly in two. I stepped forward. "I never touched that food after opening it," I said calmly. "There are cameras in the hallway and my office. Check them." And maybe ask why a meal my husband claims he made with love contained an abortion drug. The older officer nodded slowly. Then the doctor spoke again, his voice quieter, heavier. There's another factor you should know, he said. The patient was approximately 6 weeks pregnant. The world stopped. Marcus made a sound, half sob, half choke, and collapsed into a chair. Pregnant. His assistant had been pregnant. With his child. And whatever he had planned for me had ended up destroying his own. I didn't feel triumph. I felt sick. Hollow. The officers separated us for questioning. I told the truth. Every detail. The food. The smell. His insistence. Giving it away. Marcus, on the other side of the hall, insisted on one thing over and over. That he had prepared everything himself. That no one else had touched it. He didn't realize what he was doing. By claiming complete control over the cooking, he erased every escape route. When the forensic technician arrived with preliminary results, the trap snapped shut. The drug was fully dissolved throughout the stew, the technician explained. This means it was added during cooking, not later. Marcus started shouting, blaming Lena, claiming she'd taken pills herself. No one believed him. When the officer said they would review home and vehicle camera footage, Marcus's knees buckled again. I stood quietly, one hand protectively over my stomach as they led him away. He looked back once, no anger now, only naked fear. And in that moment I knew. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The hospital emptied slowly after midnight, but my body refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blood spreading across the office carpet, smelled that stew again, heard Marcus's voice asking why it hadn't been me. By the time dawn crept through the windows of my apartment, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. I couldn't afford to collapse. Not now. Not with a child depending on me. I went straight back to the office. The building felt different that morning, like a place that had witnessed something unspeakable and couldn't quite hide it. People whispered as I passed. Some looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. Rumors travel faster than facts, especially when power is involved. I shut my office door and sat down, hands trembling just enough to notice. Then the knock came. It was Mira, my assistant, the only person in that building I trusted without hesitation. She closed the door behind her and didn't bother pretending calm. They're saying you poisoned her, she said quietly. Marcus's people are spreading it already. I expected it. Still, hearing the words hurt. I need everything, I told her. Security footage, parking garage logs, entry records, anything from this morning. Mira nodded once and left. An hour later, she returned with a flash drive and a face pale with shock. There's a gap, she said. Marcus's car entered the garage at 7:10. But he didn't badge into the executive floor until 8:05. Nearly an hour unaccounted for. She pulled up footage from a back stairwell camera. A man in a mask moved quickly, carrying a heavy black bag toward the dumpsters behind the building. I recognized the walk instantly. Dorian, Marcus's personal aide. His cousin. His shadow. Whatever was in that bag, Mira said, he didn't want it found. My phone vibrated. Marcus. I let it ring twice before answering. Where are you? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. You shouldn't be alone. People are talking. I'm at work, I replied softly. I'm scared. I don't understand what's happening. A pause. Then relief crept into his tone. Good. Stay there. Don't say anything to anyone. I'll fix this. I hung up, my hands ice cold. He thought I was still blind. That afternoon, Mira uncovered the next crack in his story. Lena's apartment wasn't in her name. It belonged to a shell company, one Marcus controlled through Dorian. Rent paid monthly, quietly, consistently. The affair wasn't reckless. It was funded. That evening, I drove to a modest hotel near the hospital. Lena's mother had arrived from out of state, clutching 2 cloth bags filled with homemade food and hope. She didn't look like a woman who raised a gold digger. She looked like someone who trusted too easily. I introduced myself as Lena's employer. She thanked me through tears. She said the company took good care of her, the woman whispered. Said she lived in a dorm. I said nothing at first, then gently told her the truth. The doubt bloomed slowly in her eyes, followed by pain. I left before it turned into anger. The next morning, Marcus's desperation escalated. Dorian cornered me in the parking garage, sliding a thin file onto my passenger seat. Marcus asked me to give you this, he said nervously. Proof Lena bought the medication herself. I glanced at the receipt inside. Fresh ink. Nowhere. A clumsy lie. I laughed, a short, cold sound that made him flinch. Tell Marcus to do better, I said, and remind him accomplices go down too. Dorian ran. By noon, Mira had identified the source of the drug. A pharmaceutical rep, Marcus's ex. They had met the day before. On camera. With a package. I didn't rush to the police. Not yet. First, I went back to the hospital with Lena's mother beside me. When the doctor explained the damage, the truth broke open completely. The pregnancy was gone. So was Lena's ability to have children. Her mother collapsed. Lena didn't cry. She stared at the ceiling like someone already buried. I leaned close and whispered the truth about Marcus. About the lies. About the evidence he was trying to plant. Her eyes finally moved, and in them I saw the moment betrayal replaced devotion. That afternoon, I arranged to meet Marcus's ex. A quiet cafe. Cameras everywhere. She arrived confident. She left shaking. By the time she handed me the recordings, his voice asking for something strong, clean, something that would make a pregnancy disappear, my hands were steady. That night, I listened to everything. Marcus hadn't just wanted control. He had wanted my child gone. I copied the files 3 times and sent them where they needed to go. Then I placed my hand on my stomach and whispered, I won't fail you. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the sky was black, and Marcus was standing directly beneath it. By the time dawn broke, the city felt like it was holding its breath. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, laptop open, replaying the audio files again and again. Not because I needed to hear them, but because each replay hardened something inside me. The woman who once believed love could soften ambition was gone. What remained was someone far more dangerous to underestimate. At 8 sharp, I walked into the office. Silence followed me down the corridor. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes tracked me from cubicles and glass offices. Curiosity and judgment tangled together. The rumor mill had already chosen its version of events, and in most of them, I was the villain. I welcomed that. Villains survive. In my office, Mira was waiting, jaw tight, fingers laced together. They're panicking, she said. Marcus hasn't shown up yet. Legal called twice. So did the board chair. Good, I replied, setting my bag down. Let them worry. I pulled out the flash drive and placed it between us. This is the end of him, Mira whispered. No, I said calmly. This is the beginning. We spent the morning preparing, not reacting, but structuring. Evidence was cataloged. Timelines aligned. Financial records cross-checked. Every transaction Marcus thought was invisible now glowed, like a crime scene under light. By noon, my phone buzzed again. Marcus. This time I answered. Where are you? He snapped. The mask was slipping now. Why isn't your phone on? I've been here all morning, I said. Working. Like always. You shouldn't be, he said sharply. People are asking questions. I know, I replied. That's usually what happens after someone almost dies. Silence. Then, carefully, you didn't eat the food. No, I said. I didn't. Another pause. Longer. Good, he finally said. We'll talk tonight. At home. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Yes, I said. We will. The first real crack came an hour later. Security escorted Lena's mother into the lobby. She didn't scream this time. She didn't cry. She stood in the center of the marble floor, holding her daughter's medical file in one hand and the fake receipt in the other, and waited. Marcus walked in 15 minutes later, surrounded by advisors. When he saw her, his face drained of color. "You," he said under his breath. She stepped forward, voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "You ruined my child." Phones came out instantly. Employees froze. Advisors whispered. Marcus tried to guide her away, but she slapped the papers against his chest. "You bought poison," she said, "for another woman's baby. And now you say my daughter wanted to die." The word poison rippled through the room like electricity. Marcus looked around wildly, and his gaze landed on me, watching from the mezzanine. For the first time, fear overtook anger. He knew. That afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting. Marcus tried to postpone it. They refused. The room was packed, shareholders, legal counsel. Executives who once laughed at his jokes now avoided his eyes. He sat at the head of the table, knuckles white, projecting authority like armor. I entered last. Every head turned. "This meeting is about strategy," Marcus said quickly. "Not personal drama." I set my laptop down and met his gaze. "Then this will be very relevant." He stood abruptly. "You're not authorized." "I'm a majority shareholder," I said evenly, "and the acting compliance officer." Murmurs erupted. Before he could interrupt again, I connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide appeared. Bank transfers, shell companies, apartment leases, then the audio. His voice filled the room. Cold, precise, unmistakable. I wanted to look natural. A loss. Clean. A woman gasped. Someone swore. Marcus lunged for the cable, but security moved faster. "It's fake," he shouted. "She manipulated it." I didn't raise my voice. "Then you won't mind the police verifying it." The doors opened. 2 officers stepped inside. Behind them stood the pharmaceutical rep, face pale, eyes downcast. Marcus staggered back as cuffs clicked into place. In that moment, he didn't look powerful. He looked small. As they led him away, he turned to me, eyes wild. "You planned this," he hissed. I leaned in just close enough for him to hear. "No," I said softly. "You did." The fallout was immediate. Stock dipped. Media swarmed. Statements were released. I was named interim head by sunset. That night, I went home alone. The house felt empty but not lonely. For the first time in months, I slept. Not because the danger was over, but because the truth was finally awake. The morning after the arrest, the city woke up to a different version of the truth. I didn't. I had been awake long before sunrise, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched tea, watching the pale light creep across the floor. The house felt unfamiliar now, not because Marcus was gone, but because the silence no longer felt tense. It felt earned. My phone buzzed nonstop. Board members, lawyers, reporters, numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all until exactly 7:30 a.m., then answered one call. It was my attorney. "They've filed formal charges," she said. "Attempted homicide, financial crimes, evidence tampering. They're adding more by the hour." I closed my eyes. "And Lena?" I asked. "She's stable. Her mother is with her. The doctors—" "I'm sorry. You already know." "Yes," I said quietly. "I know." After I hung up, I rested a hand over my stomach. The child inside me shifted, a small, steady reminder of why I couldn't afford to fall apart now. Not even for a moment. By 9, I was back at the office. The building looked the same, but everything inside it had changed. Security was doubled. Executives spoke in hushed tones. The confidence that once oozed from every corner had evaporated overnight, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Good. Fear makes people honest. In my office, Mira had turned into a command center. Whiteboards filled with timelines. Screens showing market reactions. Legal briefs stacked in neat piles. You're trending, she said dryly. Half the country thinks you're a mastermind. The other half thinks you're heartless. I sat down. I can live with both. At 10, the board convened again, this time without Marcus. The chair cleared his throat, looking at me as though he were still recalibrating reality. We need stability, he said. Investors are nervous. Employees are confused. And frankly, so are we. I nodded. Then we stopped pretending this was an isolated incident. That got their attention. I stood, hands resting on the table. This company wasn't poisoned overnight, I continued. It was rotting slowly, hidden behind charm and numbers that didn't quite add up. If we treat this like a PR problem instead of a structural one, we deserve what happens next. Silence. Then one director asked carefully, "What are you proposing?" "A full internal audit," I said. "Independent, transparent, and public when necessary." A murmur ran through the room. "That could expose," someone began. "Yes," I interrupted calmly. "It could." They exchanged looks. "And if we don't?" I added, "The authorities will do it for us, with far less mercy." That ended the debate. By noon, the resolution passed. When the meeting adjourned, I felt the weight hit me all at once. My legs trembled as I returned to my office, the adrenaline finally draining. Mira noticed immediately. "Sit," she ordered, pushing a chair toward me. "Now." I didn't argue. As soon as I sat, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. From Marcus. "I need to see you. They won't let me call again. Please." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I deleted it. The visit request came 2 days later. Prison protocol. One-time spousal meeting before arraignment. My lawyer advised against it. "Nothing good can come from this," she said. "He'll manipulate, threaten, or beg." "I know," I replied. "Then why go?" Because there were some endings that had to be witnessed. The detention center smelled like disinfectant and despair. When they brought him in, I barely recognized him. His suit was gone, his hair unstyled. The man who once filled rooms with confidence now looked shrunken, like a shadow wearing his face. He smiled when he saw me. That smile used to melt me. Now it did nothing. "They told me you might not come," he said, sitting down. "I knew you would." "You always assume too much," I replied. He leaned forward. "You didn't have to destroy everything." I met his eyes. "I didn't," I said evenly. "You did. I just refused to disappear, quietly." His jaw tightened. "You think you're some kind of hero now," he sneered. "Do you know what people are saying about you?" "Yes," I said. "And I slept just fine anyway." That threw him. He changed tactics quickly, always had. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said softly. "Things got complicated. Pressure. Expectations. You wouldn't understand." I laughed once, short, humorless. "I understood the moment you tried to erase my child." The color drained from his face. He reached out instinctively, stopping just short of the glass. "It was never supposed to be you," he whispered. "That's the part you still don't get," I replied. "The fact that it could have been is what makes you unforgivable." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, "You'll regret this." I stood. "No," I said calmly. "This is the first thing I won't regret." As I turned to leave, he slammed his hand against the table. "You think this is over," he shouted. "You think you've won." I paused at the door, then looked back. "This was never about winning," I said. "It was about surviving." Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I breathed deeply as if for the first time. The real work began after that. Audits uncovered layers of corruption. Offshore accounts, falsified reports, silent partners who vanished the moment their names surfaced. Every revelation made headlines, and with every headline, the myth of Marcus collapsed further. Employees began coming forward. Some out of fear, some out of guilt, some out of relief. One evening, as I worked late, Mira knocked softly. "There's someone here to see you," she said. She insists. When Lena's mother stepped in, I stood immediately. She looked older than she had a week ago. Grief had carved lines into her face that no amount of time would erase. "I don't want money," she said before I could speak. "I don't want favors." "I know," I replied gently. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I just wanted to see your face," she said. The woman he tried to silence. I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," I said, "for everything." She shook her head. "He chose his path. You chose yours." Before leaving, she paused at the door. "Protect that child," she said softly. "That's how you make sure this doesn't happen again." After she left, I closed my office door and cried for the first time since it all began. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to release the weight I'd been carrying alone. That night, I stood by the window of my apartment, city lights stretching endlessly below. Marcus had once told me power was about control. He was wrong. Power was about refusing to disappear when someone else decided you should. And this story, it was far from over. The day the first audit report leaked, the company's stock dipped 8% before noon. By closing bell, it had rebounded to nearly where it started. That alone told me everything I needed to know. People weren't afraid of the truth. They were afraid of instability. And now that I was standing very visibly at the center of the storm, investors were recalibrating. Not out of kindness, out of calculation. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, my heels echoing through halls that still smelled faintly of last night's cleaning solution. The building had always felt imposing before. Now it felt alert, watching. In the elevator, my reflection stared back at me. Calm face, steady eyes, posture straight. No one looking at me now would guess how close I had come to disappearing entirely. At my desk, Mira was already waiting, tablet in hand. 3 anonymous whistleblowers contacted legal overnight, she said without preamble. All former finance. All willing to testify. I exhaled slowly. Good, said. Schedule them. Separately. She nodded, then hesitated. There's more. I looked up. Marcus's parents have hired a crisis firm, she continued. They're pushing a narrative, claiming he was under extreme pressure, that you were emotionally unstable. I smiled faintly. Of course they are. They're implying the investigation was triggered by personal conflict, not evidence. I leaned back in my chair. Then they're desperate. Mira watched me carefully. This is where people usually crack. I already did, I replied. I'm just done hiding it. By mid-morning, the calls started again. Media outlets, analysts, board members who hadn't voted against Marcus before, but now wanted to be seen on the right side of history. I took only one call. It was from a woman I hadn't heard from in years. One of the original investors, sharp-eyed and famously unsentimental. I'll be blunt, she said. Do you plan to burn the company down to make a point? No, I answered calmly. I plan to rebuild it without rot. A pause. Then, good. Because if you had said yes, I would have pulled everything. I know, I said. She laughed quietly. You really have changed. No, I replied. I just stopped pretending. That afternoon, I visited the hospital again. Lena hadn't asked to see me, but I needed to go anyway. She was sitting up now, pale but conscious, staring out the window as if the city beyond it were another planet entirely. When she saw me, her eyes filled immediately, not with anger, not with fear, but with exhaustion. I didn't know, she whispered before I could speak. About the drug, about any of it. I know, I said gently. She swallowed hard. He said it was for you, that you were in the way. I felt something cold settle in my chest. That sounds like him, I said quietly, her hands clenched in the blanket. I thought if I mattered enough, he'd choose me. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, men like him don't choose people. They choose outcomes. Tears slid down her temples into her hair. They told me I can't, her voice broke. I can't ever. I know, I said softly. Silence stretched between us, heavy and raw. Finally, she whispered, "Do you hate me?" I looked at her, a woman barely older than I had been when I first met Marcus. Ambitious, flattered, trapped. "No," I said honestly, "but I won't save you from the consequences of your choices." She nodded, as if she had expected nothing else. "I don't want saving," she said. "I just want him exposed." "He will be," I promised. When I left, the hallway felt longer than before. Back at the office, the board convened again, this time with external counsel present and the atmosphere sharp enough to cut skin. We went through documents line by line. Every transfer, every shell entity, every signature that had once passed without scrutiny. At one point, a director cleared his throat. "There's a concern," he said carefully, "that this level of transparency could invite further investigation into other leadership." I met his gaze. "If that's the case," I replied, "then we should invite it." He blinked. "Anyone who's nervous," I continued, "should ask themselves why." No one spoke after that. The vote passed unanimously. That night, I returned home exhausted, shoes abandoned at the door, jacket draped over a chair without care. I was halfway through reheating soup when my phone rang again. This time I answered. It was Marcus's mother. Her voice trembled with fury she barely contained. "You destroyed my son," she said. "No," I replied calmly. "I stopped him from destroying others." "You always wanted power," she snapped. "This was never about justice." I glanced at my reflection in the darkened window. "Justice wasn't the goal," I said. "Survival was." She scoffed. "You think you're untouchable now." "No," I said honestly. "I just stopped being afraid of being touched." She hung up without another word. I set the phone down, hand steady. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the baby shifted again, stronger this time, insistent. I smiled despite everything. "You're stubborn," I murmured. "That's good." Sleep came slowly. The next weeks unfolded like controlled chaos. More arrests. More testimony. Marcus's name became shorthand for scandal in financial circles. Deals evaporated. Allies vanished. Even those who had once defended him publicly began distancing themselves. At the arraignment, I didn't attend. Instead, I sat in my office, watching the live feed without sound as his lawyer spoke, and Marcus stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes hollow. When the charges were read, his shoulders sagged. I felt nothing. No triumph. No vindication. Just a quiet certainty that this chapter was closing exactly as it should. Later that day, the board offered me the interim CEO position formally. I asked for 24 hours. That night, I walked alone through the city, past places Marcus and I had once frequented, restaurants, galleries, sidewalks we'd memorized together. None of them felt like mine anymore, and that was okay. By morning, I had my answer. I accepted. The announcement sent shockwaves through the market. Some praised it as bold. Others called it reckless. I called it necessary. On my first day in the role, I stood before the company, hundreds of faces staring back at me waiting. "I won't promise comfort," I said. "I won't promise easy days." Silence. "But I will promise this," I continued. "No one here will ever be asked to lie for power again." That earned me something rare. Not applause. Respect. As the room emptied, Mira approached quietly. "You realize," she said, "that once this is over, there's no going back." I smiled faintly. "I already went back once," I said. "I barely survived it." Outside my office, the city buzzed on, indifferent, relentless, alive. And somewhere behind concrete walls and locked doors, Marcus was finally learning what it felt like to have no one left to protect him. I placed a hand over my stomach again. "This," I whispered, "is how it begins." And for the first time since everything shattered, I believed it. The first week after the announcement felt unreal, like walking through a city rebuilt overnight while everyone pretended nothing had changed. People smiled more carefully now. Hallway conversations stopped when I passed. Doors closed softly instead of slamming. No one raised their voice in meetings anymore, not because fear ruled the room, but because the rules had changed and everyone could feel it. Power no longer came from volume. It came from precision. On Monday morning, I arrived before sunrise. The city outside my window was still half asleep, lights blinking like tired eyes. I stood there for a moment with my coffee cooling in my hands, letting the quiet settle. This was the calm before resistance. It always came. By 10 a.m., it arrived right on schedule. A legal injunction request landed on my desk, filed by one of Marcus's offshore entities, claiming improper seizure of assets and personal vendetta disguised as governance. I read it once, then again, then I laughed. Mira looked up sharply. That bad? That desperate, I said. They're trying to freeze company accounts. Let them try, I replied calmly. They'll expose more than they protect. She hesitated. There's something else. A reporter reached out. Anonymous source claims you knew about Marcus's behavior long before this. That you stayed silent until it benefited you. I didn't flinch. Of course they did, I said. Truth always gets messy when it threatens comfort. Do you want to respond? Yes, I said, but not how they expect. That afternoon, I sat for a recorded interview. No makeup artist. No prepared script. Just facts. I spoke about the warning signs I ignored. About fear dressed up as loyalty. About how silence doesn't make you innocent. It makes you complicit. I didn't act sooner, I said into the camera, voice steady, because I was afraid. Afraid of losing stability. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of what would happen if I stood alone. The interviewer blinked, clearly unprepared for that level of honesty. And then she asked. Then I realized the cost of staying quiet was higher than the cost of speaking. The clip went live that evening. By midnight, it had millions of views. Some praised me. Others tore me apart. But the narrative Marcus's camp wanted, of a hysterical woman grasping for control, collapsed under the weight of something far more dangerous to them. Consistency. The next morning, the injunction was denied. By Wednesday, 2 more executives resigned quietly. By Friday, the forensic team uncovered a second layer of manipulation, accounts that hadn't even been on our radar yet. Marcus hadn't just been siphoning money. He'd been planting scapegoats. And now those scapegoats were talking. That was when his attorney requested a private meeting. I almost declined. Almost. We met in a neutral conference room downtown. Glass walls. No company logos. No home advantage. Marcus entered last. He looked thinner. Older. The arrogance that once clung to him like a tailored suit now hung loose, ill-fitting. He didn't sit at first. Just stared at me like he was trying to remember who I used to be. You planned this, he said finally. No, I replied. I survived it. His jaw tightened. You could have handled this privately. And let you do it again. I asked. To someone else? He scoffed. You're enjoying this. I leaned forward slightly. If I were enjoying it, I'd be crueler. That shut him up. His lawyer cleared his throat. My client is willing to cooperate. Reduced sentence. Asset recovery. In exchange for... For what? I asked. For your support. Publicly. A statement acknowledging. No, I said calmly. The lawyer blinked. You haven't heard the offer. I don't need to, I replied. Because the moment I protect him, I become him. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. You think you're some kind of hero now. I met his gaze evenly. No, I think I'm done pretending you're worth protecting. Silence stretched. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. A hollow, cracking sound. You always did this, he muttered. Acted like you were above it all. Like you weren't benefiting. I benefited, I said. And I paid for it. He stared at me, searching for the leverage that had always worked before. It wasn't there anymore. When the meeting ended, he didn't look back. That night, I cried for the first time in weeks. Not for him. For myself. For the woman who had once believed love meant endurance. The weeks blurred together after that. Court filings, depositions, strategy sessions that ran long past sunset. The baby grew stronger, kicked harder, a reminder, a countdown. One evening, after a particularly brutal board call, I found myself alone in the office, lights dimmed, city glowing beyond the glass. I pressed my palm to the window. "You see this?" I whispered. "This is what happens when truth stops asking permission." My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think this ends with him? You have no idea who else you've angered." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Fear had already taken enough from me. 2 days later, a former partner of Marcus's came forward publicly. Someone powerful, well-connected, and very nervous. The dominoes had started falling beyond my reach now. And that was exactly how it should be. The trial date was set. The press frenzy intensified. Every move I made was dissected. What I wore, how I spoke, whether I smiled. I stopped caring. Because somewhere between the chaos and the scrutiny, something unexpected happened. People started reaching out. Employees, strangers, women and men with stories that sounded painfully familiar. They thanked me, not for winning, for refusing to disappear. On the eve of the trial, I stood in the nursery, still unfinished, paint samples lining the wall, a half-assembled crib waiting patiently in the corner. I rested against the doorframe, exhausted but steady. "This world," I murmured softly, "is going to try to teach you all the wrong lessons." The baby shifted again. "I'll teach you better." Outside, the city roared on. Inside, everything was quiet. Tomorrow, the truth would be spoken aloud in a room designed to hold it. And no matter what happened next, I was already free. The morning of the trial arrived without ceremony. No thunder, no dramatic sky, just a pale sunrise and the soft hum of the city waking up, indifferent to the fact that lives were about to be dismantled inside a courthouse a few miles away. I woke before my alarm. The baby was already restless, a slow, rolling pressure beneath my ribs, as if reminding me that no matter how big this day felt, something bigger was still growing quietly inside me. I dressed carefully, choosing comfort over armor. No power suit, no symbolic colors, just something that let me breathe. When I stepped outside, the air felt sharp and clean. Mira was waiting by the car, phone already buzzing. "Press is everywhere," she said. "Side entrance is ready." I nodded. Let them wait. The courthouse loomed ahead, stone and glass stacked with the weight of history. As I walked in, cameras clicked. Voices shouted my name. Questions collided midair. I didn't answer. Not because I was afraid, but because the story no longer belonged to sound bites. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of paper and old wood. People filled the benches, some curious, some invested, some quietly hoping the outcome would justify their own silence in other places. Marcus sat at the defense table. He didn't look at me. That was new. When the judge entered, the room rose as one. The trial began with procedural language that felt oddly disconnected from the emotional wreckage beneath it all. Opening statements came and went. The prosecution laid out the timeline, money trails, messages, witness cooperation, the toxicology reports. Each fact landed with dull finality, like nails being hammered into something already broken. The defense tried to paint a picture of chaos, of misunderstandings, of a marriage collapsing under pressure, of a woman misinterpreting events because of emotional strain. I listened without reacting. I had expected worse. Then they called their first witness, a former executive who had once praised Marcus publicly. He spoke carefully at first, choosing words that felt rehearsed. But as the questioning continued, cracks appeared. Contradictions surfaced. Dates didn't align. The prosecution waited, then gently pulled the thread. By the time he stepped down, his credibility lay in pieces. The second witness was DeAndre. He looked smaller than I remembered. Shoulders hunched, eyes darting. When he spoke, his voice trembled. Not with remorse, but with fear. He admitted to moving money, to following instructions, to destroying documents. When asked why he did it, he hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't." That sentence echoed through the room. Fear again. It always came back to fear. Then came the recordings. The audio-filled courtroom, raw and undeniable. Marcus's voice, flat, calculating, stripped of affection. A woman in the gallery gasped softly. The judge closed his eyes for a moment, listening. Marcus finally looked up. His gaze found mine. For a second, just one, something like panic crossed his face. Not guilt, not regret, fear of exposure. I held his stare without blinking. The prosecution rested. Then the defense called me. Walking to the witness stand felt surreal, like stepping into a version of myself I'd watched from a distance for years. I raised my hand, swore to tell the truth. And I did. I spoke of the marriage, not the romance but the erosion, the subtle shifts, the control masked as care, the moments I ignored because confronting them felt more dangerous than pretending. I spoke of the stew, the nausea that saved my life, the realization that survival wasn't accidental. It was inconvenient to someone else's plan. The defense tried to provoke me, asked if I had ever suspected an affair. I answered calmly, yes. Asked why I stayed. Because fear can sound like reason when you've lived with it long enough. They asked if I was angry. I paused. Anger implies expectation, I said. What I feel is clarity. There was no follow-up to that. When I stepped down, my legs trembled, but not from weakness. From release. The rest of the day unfolded slowly. Experts testified. Evidence stacked. The defense objected. Lost ground. By late afternoon, it was clear. The narrative Marcus had built his life on had collapsed. Court adjourned for the day. As I exited, a woman approached me quietly. She couldn't have been more than 25. Eyes red. Hands shaking. "My boss," she whispered. "He does the same things. Not poisoning, but the control. The threats." I thought I was overreacting. I took her hand gently. "You're not," I said. "And you're not alone." That night, exhaustion settled deep into my bones. The baby seemed calmer, as if sensing something had shifted. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying fragments of the day. Marcus's voice, the judge's expression, the sound of truth spoken aloud. Sleep came in pieces. The next morning, the verdict arrived faster than expected. Guilty. On multiple counts. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus sat still as if frozen in place. Sentencing would come later, but the illusion was already gone. As the room emptied, he stood suddenly. "Wait," he said. The judge looked at him coolly. Marcus turned toward me. For the first time, his voice cracked. "I never meant for it to go this far." I said nothing, because intention means nothing without accountability. Security escorted him out. I watched until the door closed, and then, nothing. No triumph, no collapse, just a quiet emptiness where fear used to live. Outside, the sky was impossibly blue. Mira exhaled beside me. "You did it." "No," I said softly. I stopped protecting the lie. In the days that followed, the world reacted the way it always does. Headlines shifted. Public opinion debated. People argued online about morality, power, marriage, ambition. I stayed mostly offline, focused on healing, on preparing for a future that no longer required constant vigilance. The company stabilized. New leadership stepped in. Transparency policies were implemented. Some people left. Others stayed. The culture changed. Slowly. One evening, as I packed a box of old documents, I found something unexpected, a photo from years ago. Marcus and me, smiling, happy once. I studied it for a long time. Then I placed it face down in the box and closed the lid. Not everything needs to be destroyed. Some things just need to be put away. Weeks passed. The baby grew heavier. The nursery finally came together. Soft light, clean walls, a place that felt safe. One afternoon, as I rocked in the chair, a letter arrived. From Marcus. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the table for days. When I finally read it, the words were careful, apologetic in tone, self-focused in substance. He wrote about regret, about loneliness, about consequences. He wrote nothing about the baby. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Some apologies arrived too late to matter. On the eve of sentencing, I stood by the window again. The city lights shimmered. Tomorrow, another chapter would close, and another would begin, not with noise, but with something far more dangerous. Peace. The day of sentencing arrived wrapped in quiet. Not the tense quiet of fear, but the kind that settles after a storm has already torn through everything it needed to destroy. I woke before dawn again, not from anxiety this time, but from the baby's slow, insistent movements, gentle reminders that life does not pause for closure. I didn't rush. I made tea. I stood by the window and watched the city stretch awake. Somewhere below, people hurried to jobs, argued over coffee, worried about deadlines and dinners. To them, this was an ordinary day. To me, it was the last page of a chapter one had survived rather than lived. At the courthouse, the atmosphere was different from the trial. Less spectacle, fewer reporters. Those who remained looked bored, as if justice were an administrative task rather than a reckoning. Marcus was brought in through a side door. He looked smaller than ever. Not just thinner, not just older, but diminished. The man who once commanded rooms with a glance now avoided eye contact with everyone, shoulders rounded, hands clasped tightly as if holding himself together required constant effort. I took my seat without looking at him. The judge reviewed the case again, methodical and unemotional. Each count, each finding, each piece of evidence, summarized in language, stripped of drama. Then came the impact statements. The prosecution spoke first. Calm, firm, emphasizing not only the crime, but the breach of trust, personal and professional, the ripple effects, the precedent. Then the judge turned to Marcus. Do you wish to speak before sentencing? For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he stood. His hands shook visibly. I made mistakes, he began, voice hoarse. I was under pressure. I didn't think things would spiral like they did. A pause. I lost everything, he continued. My career, my reputation, my family. He finally looked at me. I loved you, he said, in my own way. Something inside me went still. Not angry, not sad, just finished. The judge waited for more. It didn't come. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, feeling the weight in my body shift. The room seemed to narrow, focus sharpening on the space between my heart and my voice. I don't want vengeance, I said calmly. I want accountability. Marcus flinched. This case isn't about love or betrayal, I continued. It's about choice. Repeated choices made with full awareness of harm. Choices that would have ended lives. I rested a hand over my stomach. Fear kept me quiet for a long time. Today, I choose clarity. Whatever sentence is given, let it reflect that power without conscience is not ambition. It's danger. I sat down. The judge nodded once, then delivered the sentence. 12 years. No early parole. Asset forfeiture. Permanent removal from corporate leadership. A finality that landed without thunder, but with absolute weight. Marcus closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked relieved, as if the waiting had been worse than the outcome. Security moved in. As I guided him away, he turned one last time. Not to plead, not to threaten, just to look. I met his gaze briefly. There was nothing left to say. The doors closed behind him. And with that sound, something I hadn't realized I was still holding loosened inside me. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Mira exhaled beside me. "It's over." "Yes," I said. "It is." But endings are strange things. They don't arrive with neat bows or clear instructions. They leave behind space, sometimes terrifying, sometimes full of possibility. In the weeks that followed, life began reorganizing itself around the absence of crisis. The company stabilized further. A permanent CEO was appointed. Someone competent, transparent, uninterested in theatrics. I stepped away from daily operations, choosing advisory involvement instead. I needed distance. Healing isn't passive. It requires intention. Therapy became part of my routine. Long walks, fewer meetings, more silence. Some days were heavy, others unexpectedly light. I learned that peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly when fear no longer occupies every corner. Then, one rainy night, labor began. It was slow at first, dull pressure, rhythmic tightening. I remembered the hospital corridors from months before. Remembered how they once smelled like terror. This time was different. The room was warm. The lights soft. Voices calm. Pain came in waves, intense but purposeful. Hours blurred. And then, a cry. Sharp. Alive. Insistent. They placed her on my chest, warm and real and impossibly small. A girl. Perfect. I cried then, not from relief alone, but from gratitude so deep it felt like grief's twin. Gratitude for survival, for timing, for the nausea that saved us, for the strength I didn't know I had. I named her Aria, a simple name, one that meant air, breath, life. In the quiet days that followed, I learned a new rhythm. Feeding schedules, sleepless nights, the strange, beautiful exhaustion of caring for someone who depends on you entirely. Sometimes, while rocking her at night, memories would surface uninvited. The office, the stew, the courtroom. I let them pass. They no longer owned me. Letters still arrived occasionally. From strangers. From women who saw pieces of their own lives in mine. From men who admitted they hadn't understood power dynamics until they saw consequences unfold. I read some. I archived others. Not every story needs a response. One afternoon, months later, I received a notice confirming the finalization of the divorce. I signed the papers calmly. No ceremony. No tears. Just a pen moving across paper. That chapter was officially closed. Time passed. Aria grew curious, alert, loud. She laughed easily. The house filled with light again. One day, while watching her nap, I realized something startling. I wasn't angry anymore. Not numb. Not hardened. Just free. Freedom, I learned, isn't the absence of pain. It's the absence of fear. Years later, when Aria is old enough to ask questions, I won't lie. I won't dramatize either. I'll tell her that once someone confused control with love. That silence almost cost lives. And that truth, spoken at the right moment, can change everything. Until then, I live quietly, intentionally, strong in ways that no longer need proving. And every morning, when I watch the sun rise and feel my daughter breathe against my chest, I know this. The most powerful ending isn't destruction. It's survival and choosing what comes next. If my story kept you on edge, support the channel by subscribing and sharing it with someone who loves real-life twists. Drop a comment with your thoughts and tell me where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.